Since I was young, I dreamed of having a family, a loving and caring wife, wonderful children, and a happily ever after. As usual, my dreams and plans were shattered when my wife decided she needed to take a little more time before having children. Jim Dees, the baseball analyst for the Chicago Cubs, always entertains me. One Saturday afternoon, I tuned in to watch my favorite Cubs take on the Cincinnati Reds on Marquee Sports during a break at the iconic Wrigley Field. The Houston Astros player was chatting to a young fan in the crowd. I wasn't the only one who was excited to see this. The Cubs were doing well and had a 7-2 lead by the fifth inning. The Reds made a pitching change during the break. My wife walked in with another beer for me and a glass of wine for herself. I was enjoying the excitement of the game, but my attention shifted from the fan to my wife. JD apologizes, but the sight of my wife in her shorts and halter top was far more captivating. I admitted that I was enjoying the baby time. My wife teased, glancing at the big screen. Yeah, but nothing beats quality lifetime, I replied, blushing as she settled beside me on the sofa. I wasn't quite restrained and started looking at her. You guys are just so easy to read, she chuckled, causing her breasts to bounce slightly as she shrugged. We sat in silence, watching as the Cubs scored 2. Before we knew it, Vivian had decided it was a good time to chat during a commercial break. Hey, why don't we head up to Chicago next weekend and kick off our quality baby-making time with some fun, she suggested cheerfully. You could catch a Cubs game, and I could do some shopping or whatever, she added. I caught on to what she was implying with the or whatever and shot her a sideways glance. You wouldn't want to come to the game with me, I teased. Am I contagious or something? I felt her body tense against mine. Well, I thought could we each have some time to ourselves that weekend before we start taking the birth control pill and start a family? She asked, flashing me her stunning smile and her bright blue eyes. She knew that I rarely resisted her requests, particularly when they were made with that enchanting smile. She'd been using that tactic on me for the past 8 years, 6 of which we'd spent as a married couple. However, in that moment, something felt off to me. I didn't outright reject her plan, but I also didn't enthusiastically. I said, we can support it, sure. Let's figure something out. Let's go to Chicago. We can both take Friday off and head up there on Thursday evening. I'll make the arrangements. Trust me, Vivian said excitedly. It seemed like a minor blip, and I didn't think about it again until late Friday afternoon in our hotel room. We'd already had lunch at a local diner and visited the Shedd Aquarium, so I asked Vivian what the plan for dinner was. She didn't respond immediately, and as I glanced from the TV to my wife, I could have sworn I saw her shiver for a moment. Well, it's the Cubs game tonight against the St. Louis Cardinals. You're sitting right behind the Cubs dugout on the third base side at Wrigley Field. I thought you could eat and drink there. Vivian said, it's dinner followed by drinks and dancing at one of the top-rated clubs in the city. I'm not sure when I'll be back, and I suppose I shouldn't expect to be around much on Saturday either. Then on Sunday night when we return home, we've got the pill ceremony and starting a family to think about. Wait, are you serious? I'm not letting you go out alone in Chicago for 2 nights and a day. What about us? What about our promises? I practically shouted. Vivian looked at me as if I were a slow child in need of an explanation. The latter part of that assessment was accurate. We've been discussing having children when we both turned 30 since before we got married. Right? Well, where are we now? I've decided that since I'll be doing most of the heavy lifting, I'll take the lead on this one. I've been lifting and I deserve a reward for it. I'm serious, I don't remember a rewards clause in our wedding vows. I growled, you won't be the one carrying the child for 9 months, sacrificing your tone, body, or putting your career on hold to raise the child, but I will be the one working hard to provide for our family, missing out on milestones like a first word. Don't you think that counts for something? She brushed off my concerns as if they were inconsequential, but I've been together with her for 8 years. I've never given you a reason to doubt my love or fidelity. So, I want something for myself. I want a bonus, a weekend affair. Just desire for a day and a half. Then we can ditch the birth control pills. And it'll just be you and me forever. I'm sorry, but all I'm hearing is I. You know the saying, there's no I in team. Well, there's also no I in us. But if you go through with this, there won't be an us anymore. So you're saying it'll just be you and me forever if I agree to this. But what about when we want to have another child? It'll be the same deal either way. It's not going to happen in this lifetime. Do you see a lobotomy scar on my forehead? I wasn't seeking your approval. I don't need it. She stressed, I was informing you of what's going to happen. I'm incapable of making decisions about my own body. Not my ego, babe. I'd have to address your incredible selfishness before I even thought about my ego. I replied harshly, maybe I should go seek out the same kind of fun as you. She looked taken aback. The superior attitude, she said. The attitude she'd shown me minutes ago vanished, and suddenly she seemed uncertain. She reached for her phone and sent me my Cubs ticket for the night. You take the car and I'll get an Uber to where I'm going, she said. It seemed like she'd realized that I wasn't that kind of person. I gave a frustrated shrug and grabbed my keys and phone before exiting the room without a backward glance. I could only imagine she'd assumed I was off to the baseball game like a dutiful soon-to-be cuckolded partner instead of catching the Cubs game in person. I decided to tune in on the radio on my drive home. Pat Hughes and the team were on top form as the Cubs won again. I didn't really have a plan other than to put some distance between myself and Vivian. It's a shame when you think someone is one way and they're actually another. Vivian Langer was a teller at my bank when I went in to cash my first paycheck from the national transportation firm where I'd just been hired. She'd only been at the bank for a couple of weeks, having recently graduated with I had a degree in finance. I was standing in line and noticed a pretty blonde with green eyes and what looked like a nice bust beneath her blouse. She was chatting with customers and handling their transactions really well. It was my turn at her window. My employer could set up direct deposit for my paycheck, so I could avoid the line every Friday. She said this with a big smile. I knew about this because the company's payroll director told me when I was hired. I'm someone who prefers the traditional approach of receiving a physical paycheck during the summer when I was working for my father. Electronic transactions weren't an option, so I got used to cashing my checks in person. I felt comfortable sticking to the old school method. I said, glancing at her name placard beside her window. She blushed charmingly and responded with a radiant smile as she nervously bit. I noticed her bottom lip. I realized there might be mutual interest for the next 2 weeks. I intentionally chose Vivian's line even if there was a shorter way at another teller station. Despite the other teller's invitation, I simply smiled and gestured towards Vivian, who understood my preference. I consider myself composed and logical, but I'm also confident around women. The following week, I mustered the courage to ask Vivian out on a date and she accepted. Vivian turned out to be outgoing and intelligent, hailing from a well-Vivian's family were still supportive of some aspects of her lifestyle. When I met her parents, I found out that her father, a well-known lawyer in our city, had a soft spot for his youngest and only daughter. It became clear that Vivian often got what she wanted thanks to her father's financial resources and influence. I was moving towards greater opportunities at Bishop Enterprises, which brought Vivian and her parents were happy with how things were going. John made it clear that he wanted me to keep up the lifestyle his daughter was used to. Treat my daughter well and look after her and her mom, and I'll welcome you as part of the family. But if you mistreat her or lay a hand on her, you'll have a lifelong enemy with plenty of allies. John told me that yes, Quincy is my real name. That's why Vivian and almost everyone else who knows me calls me Q. It's a tradition in our family. The firstborn son in every Now family for 4 generations has been named Quincy. My uncle is still alive, so it's a good thing. My parents actually call me something else. Vivian's parents are the only exception to this rule. Everyone else in the Langer family calls me Q. For John and Barbara, 20 months after our first date, Vivian and I had a big wedding that amazed not only me but also my parents. The ceremony was led by a state judge, and among our guests was a United States Senator whom Vivian affectionately calls Uncle Isher. Before getting married, Vivian and I had decided to wait until we were 30 to have kids so we could focus on our careers. Finance's her 30th birthday was 2 weeks before our weekend trip to Chicago. By midnight, I'd packed 2 suitcases and loaded most of my belongings into the trunk of my car. I called my younger brother Bill, who agreed to let me stay at his place an hour away for a few days while I figured things out. He and his wife promised to keep my whereabouts a secret, even if it meant deceiving my wife. By the time Sunday morning came around, I knew Vivian would have figured out that I was gone. She was busy with her lover at the time, but I knew she'd catch on eventually. I didn't get much sleep that night, thinking about why Vivian had sought comfort in another man's arms. I wondered if I had made her think I was weak or submissive. She would soon find out. On Saturday morning, I took care of all the everyday financial tasks you might think were boring, like canceling our joint credit cards and moving half of our money into an account that was only in my name. I don't know if Vivian came back to our room on Saturday and found me gone or if she'd been out since Friday night until Sunday morning. I got her first text on Sunday around 9 a.m. morning. "Hey, where are you? We need to check out by 11. She messaged, so I shared the text with my brother. We had a good laugh as we sat outside on his back porch, drinking slush margaritas. He went inside to cook bratwurst for our brunch. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law was in the kitchen making potato salad. There's nothing like family when things get tough. 30 minutes later, another message arrived. It was similar, followed by a series of increasingly desperate voicemails. The 00 message was a stark reminder that she had no way to get home. I drove us up there, and the next voicemail was angry and threatening. Then it was one of desperate pleas, as she was trying to stay at the hotel after her 2 credit cards were canceled. Those margaritas were really good, but there was no chance of her getting back together with my brother, my sister-in-law said. In-law Sharon, you two seem to have such a strong marriage and I know you still care for her deeply. I would have done anything for her and I understand that one just vanishes overnight, but the way she handled this situation tells me that at best I'm second on her list of priorities, right after herself. My brother's phone rang around 5, while the 3 of us were still on the back porch. He showed me the caller ID and raised his eyebrows, giving me the option to answer if I wished. I mouthed absolutely not. He handed the phone to Sharon, who was still relatively sober compared to Bill and me. "Hi Viv, I'm picking up Bill's phone because he's too intoxicated to answer himself." "Yes, we're aware of what happened." "No, we don't know his current whereabouts." "How could you do that to such a kind?" The lovely Viv said I could only imagine Vivian's response on the other end of the line. Sharon rolled her eyes a couple of times and grumbled once she responded with a twice and twice more. Eventually she wished Vivian luck and ended the call. "I bought you some time. You owe me." Sharon snapped at me. "Did you realize you had an argument with her and left without letting her explain? You're truly insensitive." No. I'm just relaying what she said and what Sharon said. "Dan," I muttered, "someone please pour me another margarita." He obliged once again, proving why I considered him a great sibling. I certainly wasn't qualifying for MENA membership anytime soon, despite nursing a hangover on Monday morning. I made it to work on time, albeit not dressed appropriately. "Jumping the gun, aren't you?" my boss retorted sarcastically. "What's the rush?" I replied. I came up with a plan to disappear for a while. Hopefully, it would give me some time away from my wife, or rather my father-in-law. I asked my boss to change my employee name to Oliver, my middle name, and to ensure no information about me was disclosed, at least within legal limits. In less than 5 minutes, my boss had arranged my next job. The Santa Fe office in New Mexico had an opening for me, and within 30 minutes, Oliver Now was en route to a fresh start. Officially, Quincy Now was no longer associated with Indiana, and technically, I was no longer employed by Bishop Enterprises. A week later, I commenced my new role. The company arranged a 1-week trial period. I got a new apartment and a new phone and provider so that my wife couldn't trace my calls and bills. I only shared my new number with a few people I trust. My parents weren't one of them. My brother said my mom didn't like what I was doing. I was siding with Vivian and had no intention of dealing with her judgment or risking her passing on my number to Viv. My father became an unintended casualty in this conflict. I was aware that if I shared my contact details with him, my mother would eventually persuade him to disclose it, creating a potential problem between him and me, so I chose not to. I didn't want to involve him, but Bill and Sharon were reliable and I was sure my mom wouldn't get my number from them despite her best efforts. Vivian made efforts too. Bill told me it took her around a week to realize I had left her city. How can we reconcile if we can't communicate or confront each other? She asked Bill. Maybe he doesn't want to reconcile, Viv. You really hurt him in Chicago. Bill said he wanted to respond to her, but it was just 2 nights. Bill said it didn't mean anything, but perhaps it did mean something to him. Bill replied that his career in Santa Fe carried on smoothly for the next year, even though he wasn't actively seeking it. His social life was non-existent, though. I was happy to be single, and sometimes I'd ask Bill to check if I was still legally married. It surprised me that Viv hadn't initiated divorce proceedings. I wondered why sometimes I'd join my colleagues for an evening out after work, but it wasn't until I'd lived in Santa Fe for about 18 months that I went on my first date. According to Bob Sager, she was a striking woman with dark hair and captivating eyes that radiated a certain charm. She was of mixed ancestry, half PBO and half Hispanic, and her strong, muscular legs seemed incredible, especially when we ended up in the same bed. We met several times, but I realized that she was looking for a long-term relationship. I was in a long-term relationship at the time, so I couldn't offer her what she wanted. 2 months later, I was at my favorite quiet pub in PB when I met Evangeline, who was nicknamed Angel Born. She had dark red hair, freckles, and bright blue eyes, and she was the epitome of Irish charm. She also had that well-known Irish temper. Still wearing my jacket and tie from a busy day at work, I sat drinking a shot of Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey when a woman's voice said, "The girl at the bar is mine. You can all find your own." A group of women then came in. From their clothes, I figured they'd just finished a shift at one of the local factories. They were all in jeans and work shirts. The one coming towards me had her shirt unbuttoned halfway, showing a lot of cleavage. I couldn't help but watch as she walked, her breasts bouncing. "What's on the menu tonight, Mr. Fancy Suit Guy?" she asked, flashing a wide smile and her eyes dancing. "Tennessee Honey, does that suit your fancy?" I replied. Angel and I spent the evening engaged in conversation, dancing, and chatting. She revealed that she was enjoying a rare night out as her 2-year-old was asleep. Years she was with a babysitter, and she seemed a bit embarrassed when she told me that the child's father was still unknown to her. I ended up drinking a bit too much and found myself alone. I strongly suspect I was drugged by 2 guys I was hanging out with at the party that night. I learned a few valuable lessons from that experience, the most important being that neither I nor my friends ever leave a bar alone with a man unless we arrive together. She said that with him, they either all leave together or at the very least leave in pairs. My daughter is a blessing, she's the most precious thing in my life. She took out her phone and showed me a picture of an adorable toddler. "Do you have kids?" she asked. "I don't think parenthood is in the cards for me," I replied, launching into the story of how I ended up in Santa Fe. "Wow, that's rough. But are you still married to her? You should sort that out." I know I should, but at the time I just wanted to get out of there quickly. Plus there's the issue of actually communicating with her. I went on a few dates on my own and then I started including her daughter in our outings. Eleanor was initially reserved around me until I got down to her level and engaged with her. I had read about that approach somewhere, and whoever suggested it was a great idea. I quickly became her favorite adult, according to Angel. Sometimes, when Angel and I were cuddled up on the couch, Eleanor would take my hand and lead me to the floor, where she would crawl into my lap like a puppy and fall asleep. It seemed to impress Angel, but I must admit I enjoyed it too. Angel and I had a good relationship, but the topic of exclusivity never came up. From the start, she told me she was seeing someone else. I knew Angel and I weren't going to last forever, and she was open about it, so I wasn't bothered if she carried on seeing Bobby. You never know what's going on behind closed doors. We never discussed Bobby. I didn't think she'd discussed me with Bobby, but around 3 months into our relationship she mentioned going shopping for bikinis with him a couple of days prior. I said, Bobby's a woman, spelled Boyle, not body, as in Robert. She said, yeah, I know. I said, B's a woman, a lesbian, and I'm bisexual. She said, are you sure we haven't? Angel replied, avoiding eye contact and fidgeting with her hands. I shook my head silently, caught off guard. Is that an issue for you, Oliver? She murmured softly. I had never given it much thought before. While I've known bisexual individuals, I hadn't dated one knowingly. It took me a moment to process before realizing that the gender of the person in our other relationship made no difference in our dynamic. I asked if she should be a concern if she's really attractive. I tend to find women more aesthetically pleasing than men, and if she's exceptionally beautiful, I might feel inadequate by comparison. She is beautiful, but I don't think you need to worry too much. You both bring different qualities to the table. She reassured me with a laugh and then mentioned, did I ever tell you? You know, I'm bisexual. I usually tell people that early on in my dates to avoid any misunderstandings or hurt feelings. So, does that mean you'll be curious about what we do when we're together? Are you that nosy? I teased. No, I never felt the need to pry into your personal life when I thought Bobby was a man. It's no different now that I know she's a woman. We're not exclusive, and your privacy is yours just as mine. As for me, I guess you could say she's pretty. I feigned seriousness, but she saw right through it. Who do you think Eleanor prefers? I asked playfully. You obviously, she replied with a grin. I became Eleanor's backup caregiver, obtaining written permission to pick her up when Angel had to work late. I even installed and called a child's car seat in my Mustang, ensuring her safety on our drives. A few months later, my phone rang. Later, I saw that the caller ID showed B. Clarkson's name. I didn't immediately think that Angel hadn't told me her last name, and there didn't seem to be any reason for her to call me except one. I had an uneasy feeling as I picked up the phone and heard the tragic news that Angel had been in a fatal car accident on her way home from work. The authorities had contacted Bobby after. I found Angel's phone, which listed Bobby several times in her call history. I rushed to the hospital, where I discovered that Angel had passed away. Bobby realized that ELMR needed to be picked up from the babysitter and that Angel had mentioned that I was authorized to do so. We arranged to meet at Angel's apartment after I fetched Eleanor. I arrived at the apartment with the bewildered child. I found Bobby sitting at the kitchen table, crying. She gave Eleanor a big hug as she kept crying. We stayed like that for a long time, 2 adults and a confused toddler holding on to each other. Eventually, we broke it off, realizing we needed to take care of Eleanor and make some plans. Looking back at what we knew about Angel, we realized she was an only child whose parents had passed away, with no known relatives. She was the only child whose parents had passed away with no apparent relatives in the picture, so it fell upon us to care for Eleanor until we could determine the appropriate state agency to take over. Bobby managed to find some canned tuna and made sandwiches while I located a juice box and Cheerios to feed Ellie amidst bouts of tears over our departed friend. B and I grappled with devising a plan for Ellie. We came up with a plan. We realized that legally she was under the care of the state and would likely end up in foster care, which neither of us wanted. Perhaps it wasn't the most rational decision, but we believed it was in Eleanor's best interest to stay with one of us for the time being rather than be placed in the foster care system. If the state isn't aware of her, they won't intervene and send her to foster care. Eleanor, I offered to let her stay with us. I said, "What do you know about raising a child?" She said, "Not much, but I was a child once." I replied, "That's not quite the reassurance I was hoping for." She said, "For the next hour, we discussed the topic, trying to come up with a solid plan for Eleanor." Eventually, we decided that I would give up my apartment. I suggested that we move in together and take on the primary caregiving role for the child, with daycare. Bobby offered to lend a hand frequently. We were both aware that neither of us had any experience of parenting. She said, "You know that old saying, the blonde leading the blind." This made me laugh, as it was the first time I had smiled all night. In fact, it's the blind leading the blind, but your version is funnier. I replied, "I'm Oliver now. It's a pleasure to meet you, Bobby." I shook his hand. She stepped forward and hugged me. "I'm going to miss her so much," she whispered. "Me too," I replied. The next morning, I called my boss and told him I needed a couple of days off to sort things out. Bobby and I decided to have Angel's body cremated. It took a few weeks for Eleanor, Bobby, and me to get into a routine. Bobby visited the apartment almost every evening after work, and we shared cooking responsibilities. It became obvious why Angel liked her. She was intelligent, funny, and had a touch of sass, which was reminiscent of Angel. She was also tall, blonde, and blue-eyed. She was beautiful, with a sharp mind and a great sense of humor. I really enjoyed her company and felt her absence on the rare nights she didn't visit. We often chatted about Angel. After 3 months, Bobby approached me one evening after putting Eleanor to bed. I was sitting on the sofa in the living room and Bobby was sitting next to me, crossing her legs comfortably. I can do it easily, but most men find it difficult. "Oliver, what do you think about us getting a larger apartment and me moving in with you two full-time?" She said it would be more economical for both of us and we could better care for Eleanor together. I care deeply for the child, and I suppose I want to be like her mother. I know you care for her too. We don't have to be married to raise a child. In fact, with both of us in the home, we could maintain our own social lives. Since we're friends, not romantic partners, it should reduce the likelihood of us separating. You don't have to say it like my wife and I did. Our bodies were undeniably beautiful, but we knew. She was interested in women. I never considered making a move that would be disrespectful, but I had developed strong feelings for her. We both loved Eleanor, and the plan seemed logical to me. We were devoted to Eleanor, and there was no romantic or bedtime tension between us. Bobby and I became close friends. Our trio formed a tight-knit. We quickly became a close-knit family, especially when Eleanor started calling us Mummy and Daddy. It's amazing how two simple words could have such a profound effect on us adults. The first time Eleanor called me Daddy, my heart swelled with joy. Bobby seemed overwhelmed after tying Eleanor's shoes, and Eleanor said, "Thank you, Mummy." I was so moved that I rushed to the bathroom, and a few minutes later Bobby emerged with tears still in his eyes, but a smile on his face. I was affected too. "Mummy," I confessed. She playfully punched me on the arm and I smiled and nodded. Bobby and I never engaged in typical husband and wife affection. We integrated smoothly with the parents of Eleanor's schoolmates and acquaintances at social gatherings over the following years. When asked, we were proud of not being married and avoided discussions about childbirth. I was utterly surprised when Vivian, yes, that Vivian, appeared at our doorstep one Saturday morning. For years after I left her, "Oliver, someone's here for you." Bobby called from the living room as I sat at the kitchen table playing with blocks with Eleanor. Eleanor trailed behind me into the living room, and I couldn't tell who was more astonished, me or Vivian. "Is she yours?" my wife asked, her gaze fixed on Eleanor as if she had seen a ghost. I had to close my gaping mouth to respond. "Well, she's ours, actually," I replied, gesturing between Bobby and myself. "Yours?" she replied, gesturing back between Bobby and me. "No, she's ours. We're still married." Vivian was clearly struggling and on the verge of crumbling to the floor. I motioned for her to take a seat on our sofa, and she did so without hesitation. "Viv and I may not be married, but Eleanor is still our daughter." I reassured her, "Oh well, that's somewhat reassuring. We can work with that." Vivian muttered, "What are you getting at? Why have you come back after all this time? Aren't we divorced by now?" I questioned. I was surprised to find out that I was still legally married to Vivian. She hadn't initiated divorce proceedings, assuming I would return to her within the first year. Then she and her father spent nearly 2 years searching for me before she mustered the courage to approach me for reconciliation. I asked her why she wanted to reconcile now. She replied that it had taken her 4 years to recover from me leaving. My heart is out and I'm acting like the Wicked Witch of the West. Frankly, a lifetime wouldn't be enough. You know, I love you. I always have and I always will. Vivian said I made a terrible mistake, but it was still a mistake. I'm sorry for what I did and sorry for trying to take advantage of your kindness. I thought if I shocked you enough, you'd be overwhelmed and have no choice but to come back to me. I also didn't think you'd leave me just for a bit of weekend intimacy. It wasn't a long-term thing. Having kids and spending our lives together wasn't enough to outweigh a weekend of pleasure. You knew me better than anyone. I replied, you knew my views on loyalty. You blatantly disregarded them. I won't tolerate that level of disrespect from anyone, not even my wife. She glanced around the room, pausing momentarily. You seem to have bounced back quite well, especially given what happened with your boss back home. He kept insisting to Dad's investigators that Quincy no longer worked there, even though you had just changed offices and started using your middle name. Dad eventually obtained a court order to access Bishop's employment records, and that's when I remembered your middle name as Oliver. After that, I just needed the courage to approach you. You've approached me. I responded. I'm not the biggest idiot in history. I have a family now that I wouldn't trade for anything. I have a wonderful woman whom I adore and trust completely with my heart. We respect each other deeply. We have a beautiful daughter whom we will cherish long after she grows into a beautiful woman. We're a team now. I love being part of a team. Remember, I told you there's no IE in team, no IE in US. My voice had risen considerably, nearly to a shout, for the first time. Vivian appeared genuinely remorseful, glancing briefly at Bobby and Eleanor. I walked over to my loved ones and we embraced tightly. Everything will be all right, sweetheart, I whispered to my little girl. I understand now, Vivian said softly as she looked at us. I'll file for divorce on the grounds of abandonment as soon as I get back home. I don't need anything from you financially, but would it be too much to ask for your forgiveness for being so selfish? I'll do my best, Viv, but that's all I can promise. Hopefully, with time, I'll be able to move on. Vivian rose from the sofa, offered me a half smile, and left the apartment, hopefully for good. Bobby sent Ella upstairs to play and then guided her. She led me to the sofa and sat down beside me, our knees touching. She mirrored the look Eleanor had given moments earlier. Did you mean what you said to your wife a few minutes ago about us being in a relationship? She asked. Absolutely, I replied. We don't have romantic feelings for each other, but I do love you. I trust you completely. I respect you, and I know you respect me too. I know you care for both of us as a unit. I do, she said, smiling brightly despite finally getting divorced. I didn't feel the need to jump straight into dating that wasn't me before marriage, and with a family now it was even less of a priority. While I still had some fun, occasionally finding the next Mrs. Narrow wasn't my focus. Bobby dated more frequently and had a busier social life. We stayed in constant communication about our dating lives, always prioritizing our daughter. We also had a rule against bringing dates home except for meals when Eleanor was around 11. B and I decided it was time to tell her the truth about our family on the night we planned to do so. Both of us were pretty nervous. We had been discussing this for nearly a year. That night, the three of us cried a lot. We shared photos of Eleanor's birth mother and explained her connection to both B and me. We also had to discuss Eleanor's bisexuality and Bobby's lesbianism. Of course, we had to explain our decision not to give her up to the state, but to raise her ourselves. We're not bound by blood, but by love and body. I could tell Eleanor was puzzled and anxious for days as she processed what Bobby and I had told her. She's a bright and mature child. After a few days, it seemed to click for her. You could have just let child services take me. Wouldn't that have been easier for you both? She asked during dinner. Doing the right thing isn't always the easy thing, I replied. I've never regretted my decision, except maybe when you threw up birthday cake all over my new suit when you were 6. I'm sure Mom hasn't regretted it either. Bobby, tears in her eyes, nodded as she wiped her nose with the tissue. Apart from our own friends, Bobby, I also made friends as a couple. Sometimes we went out with some of those friends. Bobby loved to dance, so we indulged in that occasionally. She was a better dancer than I was, but I worked hard to keep up with our friends, most of whom knew we weren't a couple. They often remarked on how good we looked together. Bobby occasionally danced with other friends when we went out, but she always avoided accepting invitations from them. Despite her attractiveness, she never lacked attention from either gender. While most men respected her gentle refusals, not all did. Upon returning to our table after dancing with our friend John, a man approximately 10 years her junior took issue with her rejection. He demanded, "Come on, darling. I'm better than the guy you were just dancing with or the one you're sitting with. Give me a chance." Gripping her wrist and trying to pull her back onto the dance floor, I said, "I'm fairly slender at 62 and 180 pounds, but I was still in good shape at 41. I couldn't stand by while someone mistreated a friend." I firmly grasped the arm holding Bobby's wrist and twisted the young man's arm. He yelped out in pain and released Bobby's wrist. It was a mistake. Bobby swiftly turned toward him and delivered a "well, I put a knee strike in." I should mention that she played college soccer. The young man collapsed to the floor, hitting his face on the table on the way down. When the bar manager and the bouncer came to our table, they found a young man curled up in the fetal position with his face drenched in red liquid. The police were called, and after providing our statements, we were told that neither Bobby nor I would face any charges. I'm grateful for the assistance, but Al Clarkson's daughters were already proficient in self-defense. I admire your dad's approach. Let's have him teach Eleanor next time he and your mom visit, I suggested, having moved into a 5-bedroom house. We moved into the house a couple of years ago and did some renovations. We basically ended up with 2 master bedrooms and a big family room with a built-in in the snack area. We made our home a popular hangout spot for Eleanor and her friends. B and I naturally assumed the role of surrogate parents to several teens, and we both enjoyed it immensely. I found out that Bobby had been seeing the same woman for about 2 months when she invited her to join Eleanor and me for on Saturday night. I figured out that this woman was really important to Bobby when she told me to leave the kitchen and made what I thought was her best dish, ve Parmigiano with spaghetti. Stephanie Ellis seemed really impressive at first. If Bobby rated her an 8 or 9, she easily scored a 9 or 10. She has large brown eyes, a flawless porcelain complexion, and shoulder-length dark brown hair. She has long dark brown hair and a figure reminiscent of a Sports Illustrated swimsuit model. You should let your mom play matchmaker for you, she has a talent for it. Eleanor whispered to me shortly after Stephanie arrived, "Yeah, you might be onto something there, sweetheart." I found her likable and I liked her too. I quickly grew fond of her and Bobby. Bobby was head over heels in love. It warmed my heart to see the joy in Bobby's eyes whenever Stephanie entered the room. It made me a little envious, reminding me of days long past. Bobby and I had a very close bond, and it took Stephanie some time to adjust to our family dynamic. She eventually settled in, and Bobby and I shared a unique relationship. The parents of a child we'd raised since she was 2, and our connection was stronger than that of mere best friends. We confided in each other about everything, from the trivial to the profound. I was surprised when Stephanie called a few weeks into her regular visits to ask if we could meet for lunch and requested that I kept it a secret from Bobby. I reluctantly agreed, and 2 days later I was sitting at a restaurant when Stephanie came in, spotted me and made her way over to my table as she sat down. I noticed the envy on the faces of several men and I couldn't help but quietly laugh. Often fantasies are better than reality after exchanging pleasantries. Stephanie got straight to the point when she asked about Bobby's relationship with me and whether she should get involved with someone who might already be in a committed relationship. I told her that I didn't think that was the case. Women as beautiful as her don't typically date guys like me, even if she weren't a lesbian. I'll take it as a sort of compliment, I remarked, but you're right, we do share a loving relationship. I explained that one in more detail for the next hour. We both ended up working late, but before parting ways, Stephanie had I gained a much clearer understanding of our family dynamics and a newfound appreciation for rye whiskey. She said she'd be honored to be part of this family. 6 months later, Bobby and Stephanie tied the knot since Bobby's father had passed away years earlier. I had the privilege of walking her down the aisle. A year later, old Eleanor was one of her bridesmaids. She looked a lot like her late biological mother, with her red hair and blue eyes. I was a bit nervous about being the father of a teenage girl in high school. I remembered my own experiences as a teenage boy. According to Bea and Stephanie, I didn't handle it very well. Bobby protested, recalling a time when Eleanor went out on a date. You see how embarrassed she was. You completely humiliated her. I agree you won't be meeting her dates anymore. Stephanie chimed in, I'm certain one of us can convey your good wishes to them effectively in the future. Yes, the women insisted on an apology from me. If I were to date women, would you react the same way? Eleanor inquired, probably not, but then you'd have to deal with Mom and Stephanie. That wouldn't be any easier for your date, I remarked. Eleanor paused thoughtfully for a moment, her face betraying various emotions. As much as I hate to admit it, that might be even worse. She conceded, and I chuckled, feeling relieved as she walked away. Are there any words more dreaded by a man than we need to talk? The answer is a resounding no. However, given my family dynamics, I was more puzzled than anxious when Bobby uttered those words one Friday evening while Eleanor was out with friends. She led me to our formal living room, a space typically reserved for guests. Stephanie was already there, visibly nervous, and she handed me a shot glass filled with what looked like. When I came in and sat down in the wingback chair, Angel's Envy Riesling in hand, I saw that Bobby was sitting next to Stephanie on the couch, both holding glasses of white wine. I felt completely confused. You've got me figured out, ladies, I said, apologizing for any wrongdoing. I promise I'll never do it again. The two women exchanged confused glances until Bobby figured out the situation. Relax, Oliver. It's not what you think it is, but we'll save this apology in case of another oversight, he said. Okay, Bobby, she replied, I need a favor. She looked at me, then swallowed nervously, trying to speak but without success. Stephanie finally intervened. Is it possible we could borrow some of our white stuff? Oliver blurted out. There was an awkward silence in the room as we exchanged glances. Excuse me, I stumbled. Why is it so difficult? Muttered Oliver. Stephanie and I want to have a baby, and we're wondering if you'd be willing to provide the material for that. Would you agree to do this for us? It took me a few moments to fully comprehend. I was so happy I couldn't stop grinning. I was really excited, and I couldn't wait to tell the two women beside me. I asked them how they'd chosen me and why. They exchanged glances, and then Stephanie said, I know it might be hard to believe, but we chose you because of you're intelligent, charming, respectful, good-looking, and fit. You're also a wonderful father and a fine man. We thought it would be incredible if our child could inherit some of those admirable qualities. Oh, Dan, I've only shed tears a handful of times since becoming an adult. That day was one of them. I cried like a newborn. You know, if you guys want, I could sell you my half of the house so you can. Bea interjected, we don't want you to leave. We want you here. We were kind of hoping you'd help us raise our baby like you and I raised Eleanor, and I think we did a pretty good job. What do you think? I have to admit that I took pride in the upbringing of our daughter, and honestly, I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. I was a bit apprehensive about Stephanie's thoughts, but it seemed she had already anticipated them. Stephanie mentioned that research suggests children thrive with both a mother and a father present in the household. Just imagine the potential for this child with two mothers, a father, and a sister, all before Eleanor goes off to college. Stephanie remarked amidst tears, and I managed to thank you all properly. I love you all so much. You know, I said, tears streaming down my face, that evening at dinner. We told Eleanor our plans. She jumped up and hugged VOD and Stephanie. Wow, I'm going to be a big sister. How amazing. 2 months later, we were overjoyed to see that Eleanor was pregnant. We were all excited to see Stephanie emerge from their room to confirm the news. When she appeared, we shared a heartfelt group hug. My mind was overwhelmed with emotions. Just over 13 years ago, I thought I'd never experience parenthood. Now I was only months away from welcoming a second child. Family comes in diverse shapes and forms. I always admired Ella's intellect and growing maturity. She seemed to handle the unique dynamics of our family with grace, even when faced with occasional teasing from peers, despite potential challenges like Bobby being a lesbian, Bobby and I not being married, and each of us having different last names. Eleanor rarely voiced complaints. We decided to keep Eleanor's original surname on her birth certificate, despite any criticism. She was still popular with her classmates, often inviting them to our house for gatherings, whether they were on the soccer team or band. Some adults were less accepting, but we rarely heard any negative comments from them. Maybe it was because few people wanted to confront me, and even fewer dared to challenge B, who was known for her sharp wit when defending our family. Helena ended up as the second highest ranking student in her class and had to deliver a speech at graduation. When I offered to help her, she said I had already contributed enough and didn't require additional assistance. Interestingly, she never rehearsed the speech in my presence nor in front of Bobby and Stephanie. It seemed I would have to wait along with everyone else to hear it on graduation day as Bobby, Stephanie, and I entered the gym with Roman. On graduation day, Bobby, Stephanie, and I entered the gym with Roman Alexander Ellis, who was almost a year old. We were often stopped by women admiring the baby, which caused delays. The speech was scheduled as the second address of the ceremony, and I couldn't help but smile when I saw the title. "There's No I in Team" was printed in the program. Her speech revolved around the idea that collective effort can overcome individual weaknesses, emphasizing the significance of unity and cooperation. She used our families. The differences between us are what make us a successful unit. I'm sure I stood a little taller that afternoon. Eleanor's words moved many to tears. The entire family went on a trip to Arizona State University to drop off Eleanor for her freshman year. We left Santa Fe 5 days ahead of schedule, taking part in various tourist activities. We parted ways with her as we prepared to leave, forming a line to give final hugs. I found myself at the end of the line, and upon reflection, I realized, "Dad, you promised me you'd make more effort to find a good partner." She whispered this to me as the others made their way back to the car. "I know it wasn't a priority for you while I was at home, but now that I'm gone, Mom has a good partner. You deserve one too." "I'll do my best, but I can't guarantee anything," I replied in the same hushed tone. Good partners like Stephanie aren't easy to come by. You know, it seemed natural that Roman started calling me Daddy as he began to talk, and my heart swelled each time. What caught me off guard was he using Moni for both B and Stephanie? They always knew which one he meant. I couldn't tell any difference in his pronunciation, but somehow the two women understood perfectly. 2 years after Eleanor graduated from Arizona State University, she gave me the great honor of walking her down the aisle for her wedding. I was mainly there to contribute financially and look after the kids. Roman was 21 and seemed like a nice guy, but I had to warn him not to hurt my daughter. I told him I wouldn't get involved unless she was mistreated, but he understood. He was in a chokehold, so he was a bit out of it. I'm sure he'd never hurt her on purpose, but as a father, I felt I had to make sure he knew how serious it was. In my 50s, I kept fit by going to the gym 3 days a week. The wedding went well, and I made sure to enjoy every moment of my daughter's special day. I chatted with guests at every table, enjoyed the food and drinks, and danced with lots of women. I was talking with a group of friends when a lively woman approached me. She had shoulder-length silver hair with streaks of purple. Without hesitation, she grabbed my hand and led me toward the dance floor. She had silver hair with streaks of purple and, without hesitation, took my hand and led me toward the dance floor. "Do you have a height requirement for your dance partner?" she quipped as she dragged me onto the floor, with laughter from our nearby companions. "I'm Aunt Deb," she introduced herself, as we found our place on the dance floor. "I'm Jack's mom's closest friend. I used to change your new son-in-law's diapers. Law's nappies occasionally back in the day. My nephew has spoken highly of you, and he warned me about your killer chokehold," she added with a grin, flashing flawless teeth and lively blue eyes as we began to dance. I discreetly assessed her figure, noting her gymnast-like moves as the music played. I discovered she moved with grace during the lively tunes. When a slower song came on, she closed the gap between us. "It was obvious from the start that you work out regularly," Deb marked. We walked into the bar hand in hand to grab a drink afterwards. I had a feeling she was trying to make a move, but I didn't mind. However, if she was, she'd have to get past me and Stephanie, who was the American equivalent of the Spanish Inquisition. I took her to our table and introduced her. I was pleased that my two closest friends gave her a brief grace period. "Before we get started, I'll get you another drink," I said with a grin as I stood up at the bar. Jack's mother approached me, beaming as she glanced at Deb, who was seated with Bobby and Stephanie. "She's quite a character, but I've heard you three are fiercely protective of each other. Let's see how she handles the scrutiny," Marcia said. "Wait a few minutes before you return." And that's exactly what I did. Marcia filled me in on some of Deb's background. She was a year younger than me at 55 and had been married for 15 years before catching her husband cheating about a decade ago. She gave him a swift kick where it hurts and then kicked him out. Marcia said, I returned to the table 5 minutes later to find the three women in fits of laughter. Yet for some reason I didn't feel nearly as at ease as when I had left. I'm not sure how old she is. Old Kayla Lasser was racing around our big house with our 2 Labrador retrievers. Her laughter was echoing through the rooms while her parents were relaxing with iced tea at our kitchen table. 4 of her 6 grandparents, Jack and Eleanor, who lived just 45 minutes away, often came to visit to spend time with our first grandchild. Jack's parents, Mara and Tom, told us. We were happy to extend an invitation to them to spend Christmas week with us so that all 6 grandparents and Uncle Roman could celebrate the holiday together. Mara was really pleased to accept and was looking forward to reuniting with her best friend Deb, whom she hadn't seen since Deb and I married and moved to Santa Fe. He needed a bit more convincing. Privately, he confessed his discomfort around Bobby and Stephanie. He'd never interacted closely with lesbians before. They were just like any other married couple. "Tom," I reassured him. "All you need to know is that I trust them implicitly, just as I do with you and Mara." "Well, I must say, they're both quite attractive," he admitted. I had this idea that. I told him that lesbians were nothing like them. I laughed at his comment, assuring him that he was wrong. "Trust me, they break the stereotype. Don't overthink it. Tom, they're just women. They probably own more shoes than both of us combined." Deb was everything I could have wished for in a wife. I didn't realize I needed someone as energetic and dynamic as her. I considered myself laid back. Back then, Deb was always on the move. She had this infectious energy. During the first spring she spent living with us, I had to prepare a garden for her. We read together, then proceeded to plant various salad vegetables while she supervised. I jokingly teased her about being part cat, as cats are renowned as nature's finest overseers. Bea and Stephanie grew fond of her emotionally almost as swiftly as I did. But that didn't stop them from cautioning her before our marriage that they would fiercely protect me if she ever caused me any pain. They didn't think to warn me before we got married that they'd stand by me if I ever needed them to. I could tell she was upset when she told me the day after they gave me that warning. I'm pretty sure they weren't joking, so I told her, we always have each other's backs. I know they weren't joking. I don't intend to hurt you ever, but if I do, I won't stick around. I'll disappear in a flash. It's called self-preservation. Preservation said that Santa Fe would be an ideal place to retire, and that's precisely what Marcia and Tom did. 8 years later, they retired a bit earlier than planned when the house next to ours became available for sale. Tom was really excited when he found out that Bobby was also a fan of the Premier League. Bobby supported Arsenal, while Tom's team was Crystal Palace. We were loyal to Crystal Palace. It was like being in an English pub during a match, although things got a bit heated when their teams faced off. We had some heated exchanges when we all gathered to watch Arsenal and Crystal Palace compete. We learned that football fans, or soccer, as Americans call it, are much more passionate than baseball fans. Deb, Stephanie, Mara, and I soon discovered this. Jack and Eleanor decided not to bring their 3 grandchildren when Arsenal and Crystal Palace played. It was a lovely summer evening in Santa Fe, so I sat on my porch swing on the deck behind my house, enjoying a shot of Jameson and Black Barrel Irish whiskey, thinking about how lucky I was. My eldest grandchild came out of the back door and sat with me, resting her. She was slim and sat next to me. I noticed she looked like her late grandmother, with her dark red hair and bright blue eyes. She said, "What's on your mind, Grand?" using her special nickname for me. I said, "I was just thinking about my life and how fortunate I've been." She asked, "How so?" I took a sip of whiskey, thinking about how to explain to a 9-year-old. I'm not sure how old she is. Old, well, sweetheart, you know when something bad happens, but then everything ends up okay anyway. That's sort of how it's been for me. She shifted beside me, her eyes reflecting deep thought, then her face lit up with understanding. Yeah, like when I scraped my knee the other day and Grandma Deb gave me ice cream. She exclaimed. I smiled at Kayla and she grinned back, happy that she had understood the concept perfectly. Thanks to everyone who listened to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. If you haven't already, feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.